families can either buy food or they can pay their electric bills or they can go to the doctor. So it's these real, very serious trade-offs that families have to make on a pretty regular basis.
It's not about filling bellies with empty calories. It's about nutrition.
There are quite a number of people in our system that are living just one meal away from starvation, just one meal away from the right type of food.
There's over $400 trillion of wealth on planet Earth today, and yet every 4 seconds, someone is dying from hunger. Shame on us.
The actions of a movement of people is needed to drive lasting change. And right now we need your voice because there are 41 million people on the brink of starvation. Take action, take action, take action, take action tonight.
I remember when I first moved to the US and some of my American friends used to tell me that when they were growing up, their parents would always used to say to them, finish your food, there are children starving in Africa. Well, guess what? Finish your food because there are children starving in America and indeed in most countries around the world. And I think this awareness needs to be known by as many people as possible because the issue of hunger is an all of us issue. And here in America, there are children going to bed hungry, families going to bed hungry, and we need to shift this misperception that global hunger is happening somewhere else. Hunger is happening in our own backyards, in our own neighbors' homes, and we just need to make sure that we are all playing our parts to support whenever we can. And when organizations that are working at the forefront of addressing global hunger aren't being given the support or the resources, you are literally putting the burden on them as well to decide who gets to live and who gets to die. You're listening to Better Food, Better World. I'm Elizabeth Nyamayaro, and in this episode, we'll talk about who is at the top of the food chain. Is this even a good thing? And what does it mean to be surrounded by choice and a million of brands of food when too much is not a good thing? We'll look at how, even in rich parts of the world, like right here in New York City, my current home, there is so much inequality and inequity. We'll hear how the nutrition crisis is tied to climate change. And we'll meet two people who are working at the grassroots level to make sure that kids and adults around the world get the healthy food they desperately need. I remember the first time when I moved to New York City and how incredible it was that I was literally surrounded by food, whether it was the restaurants around my neighborhood, but even just going to my local supermarket. There was just hundreds of choices of food that I could get. And I remember even just something as simple as buying a yogurt ended up becoming quite a chore because there was just at least 20 or 30 different choices of yogurt. I remember thinking, first of all, wow, what an incredible choice, being able to have pretty much everything that I want. But the more I started looking into it, the more I realized that most of these foods had been so highly processed, so modified that it was literally eating food like products. Even a yogurt, there were 20 different choices of yogurt, and most of the yogurts had been refined and reprocessed, and there was so much sugar added to them that they were literally no longer the healthy food that they were supposed to be. And you found that some yogurts had more sugar in them than literally eating a donut. I was like, I'm better off eating a donut than eating a yogurt because that's how very little nutritious value the food had. And at the same time, though, the thing that was also just heartbreaking for me was realizing that even though I had this much choice, there were neighborhoods very close to where I live that literally had the opposite. Communities there had no access to healthy food, either for economic reasons, but also in some cases, it was just simply the fact that their neighborhoods didn't have the supermarkets where they could have access to healthy food. And it had literally come down to some policymakers making the decision on where to put a good supermarket and where to not put a supermarket. Communities were literally living in food deserts. And I know most of you listening might be asking the question, what is a food desert? Well, a food desert is exactly what the image conjures up. It's an area where a third of its population lives greater than 1 mile away from a supermarket for urban areas or greater than 10 miles for rural areas. And as someone who's now living in New York City, it is devastating for me to know that here in America, at least 23 million Americans live in food deserts, including in New York City. And that's very devastating because eating healthy should not be a luxury. It is a right that we all deserve, regardless of our economic status. And the sad reality is that food insecurity will only get worse as climate change gets worse. The climate crisis is driving global hunger. We're seeing climate shocks and stresses destroy lives, destroy crops and livelihoods, and most importantly, really undermine people's ability to feed themselves. Communities who contribute the least to climate change are actually bearing the brunt of its impacts with limited means to cushion the blow.
There are quite a number of people in our system that are living just 1 meal away from starvation, just 1 meal away from the right type of food.
This is Dr. Agnes Kalibata, who is UN Secretary General's Special Envoy to the 2021 Food Systems Summit. It's a moment for global decision makers to take action and work together to transform the way the world produces, consumes, and thinks about food. Dr. Kalibata is leading this work. Dr. Kalibata, are we having a nutrition crisis?
On one hand, you have a nutrition crisis that deals with not receiving enough. And there's a whole part of the world, especially my part of the world, in Africa and a few other countries that have similar problems, where people are not receiving enough, all the way from, do they have enough calories? When they do have enough calories, they don't have enough protein. When they have enough protein, they don't have enough lipids. And you could go on. And all these things have an impact on how your body develops and your brain develops and all that. So we already know that. But there's also the part of the healthy food. Half the population of the world is suffering from a new form of, I'm saying new, but it's not new anymore. New types of diseases, diet-related diseases. Just imagine if we moved some of these resources that are being used to treat diseases, if we moved them into ensuring that we have the right foods on the shelves, we have the right level of education for children as they grow up, we have the right level of support for women as they feed their children. Just imagine what a difference this would make. So for me, the nutrition crisis is right there, is the fact that we do spend resources to do the wrong thing, which we could spend to do the right thing. We really don't need to be spending resources to treat people that are sick from food-related diseases. We need to reverse that. There's an opportunity here for private sector to reduce the amount of unhealthy food on their shelves. There's an opportunity here for government to put the right policies in place. There's an opportunity here for government to start investing in the things that ensure that people have access to the right level of information, have access to choices, and have access to the ability to move forward in the right way.
Yeah, I mean, that's very powerful. I think you've just reminded us that prevention is better than cure, right? We're waiting until there's a disaster when we can actually just act swiftly at the beginning, at the root cause of the issue, because our executive director, David Beasley, always says that, first of all, hunger is a solvable issue. And he always says that we have a vaccine for hunger. It's called food, right? And it's just making sure that people have access to the right nutritious food. You've touched upon a very important aspect in terms of the true cost, right, of not eating healthy, which is related health issues. But how worried are you that if we don't act fast enough, the impact that this is going to cause on climate change and food security is going to be catastrophic. How worried are you about the issue?
The other part of the cost of food systems is definitely a cost to our environment. Food is environment. I'll give you a very simple example, the avocado example. Every time you eat an avocado in the US, just remember that 90% of the avocados were rejected. Those 90% of the avocados that were rejected contribute 8% to waste. And waste contributes 8% to climate change, to emissions. So let's understand that food is much more than what we see in front of us. Food is only good if it is good for your health. It's only good if it is good for our environment. It's only good if it is good for your neighbor. It can't just be something that's good for you alone.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much. What you're hearing now is people waiting in line for support at one of New York's leading food pantries, which was set up to help those who, for whatever reason, have little access to a daily diet. Thanks to the generosity of people, they can come here to a few selected sites to receive food bags and hot meals.
So my name is Stephen Grimaldi, the executive director of the New York Common Pantry.
This is just one of hundreds of neighborhood initiatives supporting families who can't afford food items.
I'm very passionate around providing resources, information, and tools for people that are food insecure and or living in poverty.
He took time out of serving hot meals and lunch to the thousands they help every day to tell me why this matters.
We're really connecting people to healthier food. It's not about filling bellies with empty calories. It's about nutrition. I think there are so many empty calories. There are foods with so many saturated fats, processed foods. And they're so inexpensive, right? And they're easily accessible, especially in communities of color and poor communities here in New York City and really around the country and around the globe, that I just feel as though it's what makes us double down on this work, because we believe that we can make a difference and we can help folks.
And the fact that most of the dialogue around food tends to focus on availability of food, when we should actually also be talking about how communities can have access to the right food, meaning fresh and nutrient-rich food. And it's difficult for me because, and I've taken this thing on because I've also realized, right, that the issue of food deserts, it is really an issue that is disproportionately impacting low-income communities. And it is an inequality issue. Literally, we're talking about how I live in Manhattan and the amount of choice that I have in terms of food. If I'm just to drive off the island into New Jersey, and I've been to communities there, and I've been to communities in Middle America, and I noticed that there's fewer supermarkets in lower income neighborhoods compared to higher income neighborhoods. There's a lot of work that needs to happen here in the US, and we need to get it right for minority communities. And right now we are not. And it's not right.
I think we have to educate people that these programs exist. We're working with the city of New York. And, you do need really strong partners. I think that's a big takeaway here, is that when you've got city, state, and federal, everyone working on the same page, that really helps. We've worked with the city to understand where a lot of these holes are, right? Because they have access to a lot of that data. So we're able to sort of say, okay, we are here. We're able to do this work. Another organization is able to do this work. Let's find the 4, 5, 6 organizations who can do this work. And let's pinpoint communities who have the greatest need, who are living perhaps in food deserts, right? Where there are not supermarkets, where there are not markets that may sell as much healthier food, or oftentimes they may sit on shelves. And they tend to have the hard vegetables, right? The potatoes and the onions, but not the broccoli and the carrots and the green vegetables and the things that we really deeply care about and the people that we serve care about. So we want to make sure that we're coming into those communities and helping people also get the resources beyond food so that they don't need to come to food pantries, because the SNAP program, formerly known as food stamps, SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, is absolutely vital in the United States. That's a program that we try to help people access.
Stephen, one of the things that struck me is how dignity is such a big focus of your work at New York Common Pantry. I'm intrigued. Can you tell us more about that?
Dignity is infused in all of our program. It's core and it's central. And how so? It's about access. So we want to provide people with access to some of the fresh fruit and vegetables and some of the fresh food that people of all economic backgrounds enjoy. When you go into the supermarket and you have means in the United States and all over the world, you have access to better quality food, fresher food. And so dignity is about choice. We give people choices through our choice pantry. So what we do is we have a tablet. People are able to choose their food in different food categories and then in real time receive that package. They can also order from home and then come and pick it up at a time that's convenient for them. So access is about the type of food. It's also about when you pick up your food. We have a Saturday distribution, right? So people working, a lot of poor working folks come, and we want to make sure that this food is accessible to them. And when you come, we also want to treat you with respect, make sure you not have to wait. So that's the part of our choice pantry system around ordering in advance, minimizing your waste, and coming to a clean environment. Volunteers and participants are always commenting about the cleanliness, the friendliness of our staff. That's part of dignity. We don't want to further stigmatize people who are coming for food. That's part of our mission.
Okay, so here's a very important question for you. What keeps you up at night?
My own personal approach is to not be angry and just be hopeful. And that hope can actually fuel a lot of change. It opens up my optimism and the opportunities to do more. So a challenge is an opportunity, right? So what are the challenges? Food waste is a big one. 40% of food is wasted in our city every day, really across our country. That's an enormous amount of food that ends up in landfills, producing methane, contributing to global warming. That's a win-win if we can not let it get to the landfill, right? So our message is around food rescue. So we've got vehicles, we've got drivers who are committed to this. Now, during the pandemic, we redeployed those folks to do distribution and really targeted communities that were underserved. There wasn't as much wasted food. It did allow us to see that food waste is something that we can do more about. So the good news is that we have the opportunity to leverage that wasted food.
Okay, so now let's take stock. I often get asked the question, what can I do? How can I make a difference? Well, Better Food, Better World is about action. And I think you've heard the term, act locally and think globally. It doesn't matter if you're in New York or in New Delhi or in Nigeria. There's a growing number of people who are hungry close to where you are, and especially young children.
Have you ever thought about what you need to do to change the course of history and make a difference? I'm sure this is top of mind for everyone listening. Lauren Bush-Lauren thinks about this every minute of every day, and she's the CEO and co-founder of Feed, a fashion brand that sells bags, accessories, and home goods. The sales from these products go towards feeding hungry children around the world. Hi, Lauren. This is a huge task. How did you get started?
Oh my goodness. Feed was actually really born out of that frustration. As a 20-year-old, I went and I was seeing these communities and specifically children facing hunger. And I so wanted to do something. And I was frustrated that I didn't have an answer to my friends and peers. So I would tell about my trips and show pictures. And I didn't know what to tell them to do because I myself didn't know what I could do. And yet I had the idea for a burlap bag. And literally that burlap bag has manifested into 120 million school meals given. So it's just an example of what I think we're all capable of when we, sit in that frustration and don't let it get us to a place of thinking we can't do anything, but actually let it inspire you to come up with a creative solution that maybe only you uniquely can do or pull off. So I think a lot is persistence, of course, but also maintaining a sense of hope and a sense of purpose.
That's really powerful, right? Like a simple idea that literally changed the world. What I also find remarkable about your work, as you said, you didn't try to boil the ocean because addressing any inequality, including global hunger, can really feel rather daunting. And so you decided to focus on school feeding. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, of all the many programs I saw in the field What really touched me and struck me was school feeding. So on that very first trip, actually, with the World Food Program, when I was, again, a student in college, I was able to go to Guatemala. I found myself immediately, the very first stop was a therapeutic feeding center where kids are taken who are just very severely malnourished. And as I was leaving, a mother put her son in my arms and I could literally cradle him as you would, a small child, a young boy. And I later found out he was actually 7 years old. And he was so badly malnourished, so stunted from the lack of something as basic as, in a human right, as food. And I will never forget that boy and that experience. And we kind of, gathered ourselves after that. And the next stop was to a school just down the road from this therapeutic feeding center in the, very rural area in Guatemala. And at the school, kids were laughing and playing and loved that they had visitors. And it was just, it was what I normally would think of for kids who were curious and engaged and clearly healthy, especially compared to the kids I had just visited at the clinic. And it just was so simple. They were there. They were getting a free school meal. It was, one of the main reasons many of those kids were going to school on a regular basis. And it's such an amazing double whammy in that you're not only feeding kids and giving them the nutrition they need, but they're also incentivized and really encouraged to go to school. And with that education, hopefully break out of the poverty cycle they're born into. So really from day one, that's what Feed was created to support, school feeding programs globally. We also support some as well here in the US and in India. And I just feel so strongly that all the silver bullets, if you will, to help development, school feeding is just one of them, one of the most important ones.
Wow, that is such a powerful story, Lauren. And, as someone who almost died from hunger, I just know the difference these efforts make. And it's heartbreaking, right? When you think about the fact that even now, a child dies every 5 seconds from hunger, and yet there's enough food to feed everyone in our world. But I want to just go back to school feeding because you also said something very powerful. You always refer to school feeding as the great gender equalizer. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I specifically then had the great opportunity to visit other countries beyond Guatemala, one of which was Chad, for example. And in Chad, girls are sort of secondary citizens and girls' education certainly isn't valued. You would put whatever funds you had to send your boys to school. And what's the point in educating a girl? She's going to get married and she should tend to the family and the household. And yet school feeding was this great incentivizer to send girls to school because parents who are having trouble making ends meet will certainly send their girl to school in order to get that food for her and also maybe extra food for the family. So it is just this awesome equalizer. And as you well know, when girls are empowered with food, but also in education, they just go on to do great things. They have less kids. Their kids are better educated. It's such an amazing, proven way to help break the poverty cycle they were born into.
Yeah, and there's even an African saying, right? When you educate a girl, you educate a nation. And that is so true. So thank you for your work. And I want to talk about the hunger in the US because I think most people would be surprised actually to hear that there are communities and families also facing food insecurity in the US because we often see it as something happening in the developing world, something happening in Africa. And yet the reality is that 1 in 9 person, right, in the world is facing some kind of food insecurity. Let's talk about your work here. And again, for US listeners who are not aware of the situation, what would you say to them?
The reality is 42 million Americans are food insecure. Approximately 13 million kids are food insecure. And what that really looks like is often it's a trade-off. Families can either buy food or they can pay their electric bills or they can pay their housing or they can go to the doctor. So it's these real, very serious trade-offs that families have to make on a pretty regular basis to make ends meet and put food on the table. And I think the misnomer here is you think a hungry maybe American is someone who's homeless or not working, or the vast majority are actually very hardworking Americans who are working multiple jobs and literally just can't make ends meet. Maybe they live in a food desert. There's so many complexities and issues to why hunger exists here, but it's very real. And it's very real for 42 million very dedicated, hardworking Americans.
Yeah. And I think also that's something that most people aren't aware of, that, getting access to food doesn't just mean any food. It has to be healthy. It has to be nutritious. And whilst some Americans may have access to fast food, that is not real nutritious food, right? And then we call these areas where people can't find supermarkets food deserts. And there are millions of Americans, currently living in food deserts, which is really heartbreaking, right? When you think of America being such a developed country.
Yeah, it is. It's shocking, the disparity here. That cuts across racial lines, socioeconomic, it's very much sort of a product too of where you're born and into what community and what situation. In a land exactly of hope and opportunity, that really exists here is a big issue. And I do think the pandemic has brought that to light more for many Americans. To give the media some credit, they have done a really good job covering the sort of miles long cars, to pick up food at food pantries and soup kitchens across America. And the need has been, I think, at the forefront more because so many families, who were getting by are now having to rely on these food banks to get by.
I also believe that real change happens when we empower communities, right, to lead and inform change. And for many of our listeners today who want to be part of creating the change, what advice would you give them in terms of the action that they can take to be part of ending global hunger?
I mean, I think the magic combination is getting in touch with what are your personal passions, what are your resources, whether that's time, whether that's money, whether that's a talent you have to give, and combining that with helping to end hunger. I mean, I think this is going to take all institutions, all people working together to get behind this major issue. So I really encourage people to kind of find their own path into it. I think it's a more sustaining and more inspiring when someone is engaged, whether it's on a local level, meaning being a regular volunteer here in the US at a soup kitchen or food pantry is majorly important. Most of these organizations are literally run by volunteers, and or making a donation. Obviously, supporting the World Food Program goes so far. It really costs so little to do so much, which was also something I was extremely struck by when I started traveling with the World Food Program, to know, gosh, this one coffee I bought today could give 50 meals. It's sort of mind-boggling. And hence the feed model actually kind of came from that, where every product we make and sell, there's a number on it. So customers know very tangibly, very meaningfully the impact they're going to have through the purchase of that feed product. So obviously I encourage people to buy feed bags too, a little plug there, because you can know exactly, the impact you're having. But more importantly, it's taking that first step, because we all can do something and hunger is a solvable problem. I encourage everyone to do their part.
One of the things that struck me when I came to the feed store in Dumbo in Brooklyn, and I remember thinking, because I know before you were just doing bags and then now you're doing coffee. And I just thought, imagine if every single coffee shop would also be part of feeding people, because it's something that here in the West, we just kind of take it for granted. And it's almost a treat, right, to be able to have coffee. And yet that coffee can actually give life-saving food to a child somewhere in the world.
As a parent now too, I'm already thinking about I've taken my son who's 5 to do little volunteer things. So I do think it's also about engaging and educating the next generation as best we can. And I mean, it's fun to help others. It's selfishly, it's very meaningful and heartwarming. And I want him to have that sense of joy and also a sense of purpose in his life.
So we are on a podcast called Better Food, Better World. What is your wish for better food and a better world?
I mean, I think it's simple to have that children everywhere can have access to healthy, whole foods that will help them not only develop properly and grow properly, but thrive in their lives. The lack of food or food insecurity doesn't become a central theme or central concern in their lives, that they can't then live up to their full human potential.
World Food Program Executive Director David Beasley is passionate to the core about how we can make this a better world.
There's $400 trillion worth of wealth on the earth today. And the fact that 9 million people die from hunger every year, shame on us. The net worth of billionaires during the height of COVID was a substantial $216 million per hour, yet 1,000 people per hour were dying from hunger. Shame on us. And yet we only need billions to reach the hungriest of the hungry around the earth. Shame on us. Now, what are we going to do about it? This is the call to action. It's because, children can't eat empty promises. It's up to us to deliver and make food security and nutrition a reality. My goal is to put the World Food Program out of business, but how can we do that in the direction that we're now going?
Such powerful words, and I couldn't agree more. The task is enormous, but I firmly believe that it is something that we can all undertake as a collective. So here's my wish this week for better food, better world. It is that I hope that we realize and recognize that we all can be part of ending global hunger. And if you're looking for any inspiration, I want to leave you with one of my favorite African proverbs. If you think you're too small to make a difference, try spending a night in a room with a mosquito. As you can see, none of us are ever too small to make a difference.
Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to hosting you next time from Honduras and the Dry Corridor, where we will find out how climate change has been disrupting our food systems. And if you'd like to get in touch with us, please do follow us on #BetterFoodBetterWorld.